What happened to budding on a live television larboard Mark Levin absolutely aghast, and may accept aloof afflicted how America sees adolescent atramentous attorneys forever. The 76-year-old bourgeois radio host thought he could abase Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett about her law bulk on civic TV. He was asleep wrong. The moment Crockett pulled out that manila binder and said, "Mr. Levin, let's allocution about acknowledged credentials," the entire studio fell silent. What she appear abutting didn't aloof abort Levin's argument. It apparent commodity much bigger about how the acknowledged enactment tries to black out assent voices. What fabricated this battle alike more shocking was the context. Aloof hours afore the show, Levin had been backstage boasting to producers about how he was activity to advise this adolescent congresswoman an assignment about complete acknowledged expertise. His aplomb was so absolute that he had absolutely requested added time for what he alleged an educational moment for the viewers. The producers, Analysis Abeyant Drama, had agreed to extend the segment. They had no abstraction, they were about to attestant the most complete bookish annihilation in television history. Levin's aggregation had able what they anticipation was a foolproof strategy. They had researched Crockett's Law Academy ranking, acclaimed that it wasn't in the top bank of national rankings, and afflicted this would be abundant to abate her credibility. They had alike prepared follow-up questions about her abridgment of Supreme Cloister clerkships and above-law close experience. It was a playbook that had formed endless times afore a join younger, beneath accomplished opponents. Afore we dive into this incredible showdown, be to animadversion cogenus area you're watching from. And don't balloon to hit that subscribe button, so you never absence these jaw-dropping political moments. Trust me, your activity to appetite to see every second of what happens next. The battle started aback Levin, accepted for his advancing analytic style, decided to go afterwards Crockett's acknowledged accomplishments during what was declared to be a accepted action discussion. Little did he know, Crockett had appear able for war. The flat itself seemed to faculty the advancing storm. Camera operators adjusted their angles, alive aimlessly that commodity bigger than action agitation was about to unfold. The lighting aggregation had positioned the spots to actualize affecting shadows, and the ambassador in the ascendancy allowance was already signaling to accumulate the cameras rolling no bulk what happened. This was the affectionate of television that creates legends and destroys reputations in according measure. Abaft the scenes, whispers were already circulating amid the assembly staff. A acclimatized attic administrator, who had formed in television for over 2 decades later, said he could feel the electricity in the air afore the Aboriginal catechism was alike asked. "You advance an aptitude for these things," he explained. "Some interviews are aloof conversations. Others are antagonistic combat." This felt like the closing from the moment they sat down. The show's controlling producer, watching from the control room, fabricated a burning accommodation that would prove preempt. Instead of afraid to the planned bartering breaks, she instructed her aggregation to accumulate rolling no bulk how connected the battle lasted. "I knew we were about to witness something historic," she afterwards recalled. "You don't arrest history for advertisements." Mark Levin sat abaft the agitation desk, his signature scowl already basal as he adapted his glasses. At 76, the former Reagan administering advocate had congenital his acceptability on abolition opponents with rapid-fire acknowledged arguments and built-in knowledge. His radio appearance accomplished millions, and his books topped bestseller lists. Tonight, he was assured he'd activate an attainable target. Levin's alertness for this appointment had been minimal. His analysis aggregation had provided him with basal biographical advice about Crockett, adolescent atramentous Democratic congresswoman from Texas, graduated from a historically atramentous law school. In his mind, this was all he needed. He'd congenital a career on intimidating opponents with his Ivy League accreditation and decades of media experience. His advance action was simple. Catechism her abilities early, authorize dominance, again bank through the blow of the altercation with his ascendancy unchallenged. What Levin didn't apperceive was that his acceptability for credential attacks had preceded him. Crockett's aggregation had advised hours of his antecedent interviews, acquainted his arrangement of analytic opponents' educational backgrounds, and able acquaintance as a way to abate their arguments afore they could alike begin. They had prepared abundantly for this exact scenario. Above from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, 43, her natural beard altogether styled, cutting a aciculate fleet blazer that allowable respect. The The Texas Democrat had been making after-effects of back accession in Congress, but abounding enactment abstracts still saw her as a aloof edition adolescent politician without austere acknowledged chops. They were about to apprentice how amiss they were. Crockett's adventure to this moment had been annihilation, but typical. Growing up in a banal ancestors in Missouri, she had watched her parents' assignment multiple jobs to accomplish ends meet. Her ancestor collection a barter during the day and formed aegis at night. Her mother cleaned offices in the aboriginal morning hours afore advancing home to get the kids attainable for school. Apprenticeship wasn't just important in the Crockett household. It was apparent as the alone aisle to a bigger life. Aback Crockett absently to pursue law, she faced the aforementioned best abounding ablaze acceptance from bashful backgrounds confront. Attend a prestigious academy and alum with crushing debt, or accept a affection academy that wouldn't broke her family. She chose Prairie View A&M not because it was her alone option, but because she researched their bar access rates, their charge to training attorneys who would serve their communities, and their clue almanac of bearing attorneys who absolutely accomplished law rather than aloof talking about it. Her law academy acquaintance had been transformative. Clashing some aristocratic institutions, area theoretical discussions dominated. Prairie View emphasized applied abilities and complete Apple application. Acceptance weren't just reading about built-in law. They were filing briefs, arguing motions, and APRI-completed mirrors under supervision. By the time Crockett accelerating summa cum laude, she had already argued for a federal adjudicator and helped secure a civilian rights adjustment that afflicted action at the bounded level. But what absolutely set Crockett afar was her post-graduation career trajectory. While abounding law academy graduates from aristocratic institutions went beeline to corporate firms to do certificate analysis and research, Crockett had a non-amorphous demography on circuitous civilian rights cases that absolutely mattered to complete people. Her aboriginal above achievement came aloof 2 years out of law academy aback. She successfully challenged abominable hiring convenants at a above corporation, accepting not aloof budgetary immersement for her clients, but abiding action changes that afflicted bags of employees. Her acceptability in legal circles had developed steadily but quietly. She wasn't giving speeches at acknowledged conferences or autograph academic articles. She was in courtrooms acceptable cases and ambience precedents. Federal judges began to admit her name on filing documents, alive that aback Jasmine Crockett was involved. The legal arguments would be thorough, well-researched, and compelling. What abounding bodies didn't apperceive was that Crockett had absolutely angry bottom-ward several advantageous offers from celebrated law firms afterwards graduation. Major accumulated firms had approved to recruit her. Starting salaries that would accept a non-afflicted her family's banking situation. But Crockett had altered eyes for her career. She capital to use her legal skills to accomplish a complete aberration in people's lives, not to advise corporations abbreviate their tax accountability or navigate regulatory loopholes. Her best to focus on civilian rights and built-in law wasn't aloof philosophical. It was deeply personal. Growing up, she had watched her parents face bigotry that they couldn't allow to fight legally. She had apparent ablaze classmates beat from advancing academy apprenticeship because they were told they weren't academy material. Her acknowledged career became her way of ensuring that others wouldn't face the aforementioned barriers without addition able to action for them. By the time she entered politics, Crockett had congenital acknowledged resume that most attorneys could alone dream of. She had argued before federal appellate courts, won battleground civilian rights cases, and been accustomed by acknowledged organizations above the political spectrum for her arete and integrity. Yet, because she hadn't followed the acceptable aisle through aristocratic institutions and accumulated law firms, abounding enactment figures continued to belittle her. The stakes couldn't accept been higher. This wasn't aloof about two attorneys debating policy. This represented a generational and cultural affray that had been brewing in acknowledged circles for years. Levin represented the old guard, the acceptable bourgeois acknowledged enactment that had bedeviled for decades. Crockett represented something new, young, diverse, and adventurous to claiming the cachet quo. The moderator had about accomplished introducing the articulation on bent amends ameliorate aback. Levin leaned forward. That familiar smirk bridged his face. He'd done his homework, or so he thought. Crockett had graduated from a historically atramentous law school, not an Ivy League institution. In Levin's mind, this fabricated her an attainable mark. Before we altercate criminal justice, Levin began, his articulation accustomed that arrogant accent he aloof for opponents he considered beneath him. I anticipate the admirers deserves to apperceive about the acknowledged abilities of the bodies making these arguments. Crockett's eyebrows aloft slightly, but her announcement remained calm. She'd heard this song before. The analytic of credentials, the attenuate implications about the affection of her education, the assumption that because she didn't alum from Harvard or Yale, she somehow wasn't aces of the aforementioned respect. I'm blessed to discuss qualifications, Mr. Levin, she replied evenly, her articulation steady, but with an association that appropriate she was ready for whatever came next. The admirers could feel the restriction building. Amusing media was already active as clips of the aperture barter started circulating. This was about to become abundant added than an action debate. Abaft the scenes, Crockett's aggregation had spent weeks advancing for absolutely this affectionate of attack. They knew Levin's playbook. He always went afterwards accreditation first, bold it would put opponents on the defensive. But Crockett had angered this weakness into her strength. Every certificate in that manila binder had been anxiously researched, verified, and organized for best impact. Her communications director, watching from the blooming room, had already prepared social media responses for assorted scenarios. But as he watched the battle unfold, he accomplished they might not charge any accident control. If anything, they adeptness charged to adapt for achievement lap. Levin's advance came abrupt and brutal, advised to abase and diminish. Ms. Crockett, he said, aptitude aback in his armchair with the aplomb of addition, who'd done this 1,000 times. You went to some law academy in Texas that best bodies except never heard of, didn't you? Not absolutely the affectionate of legal training we'd apprehend from addition aggravating to address the American bodies about built-in law, the audience gasped. Even for political television, this was almighty claimed and direct. Levin continued, acutely activated by the reaction. I mean, let's be honest here. Aback we're talking about austere acknowledged matters. Shouldn't we apprehend from attorneys who absolutely went to austere law schools? I went to Temple University's law school, formed in the Reagan Amends Department, served as Arch of Agents to Attorney General Edwin Me. What absolutely are your abilities above actuality adopted to Congress? Crockett's jaw anchored slightly, but she maintained her composure. Years of facing agnate challenges had accomplished her patience. Mr. Levin, are you suggesting that the quality of acknowledged apprenticeship is bent alone by the ascendancy of the institution? I'm suggesting, Levin shot back, his articulation rising, that aback you're talking about built-in estimation and bent justice policy, acquaintance and apprenticeship matter, and frankly, your accomplishments doesn't inspire aplomb in your adeptness to accept these circuitous acknowledged issues. The words affrayed in the air like a gauntlet befuddled bottomward about the studio. Admirers' assembly abashed uncomfortably. Some were comatose in acceding with Levin, but others looked absolutely affronted by the claimed attributes of the attack. This wasn't action debate. This was appearance assassination bearded as credential verification. In blooming apartment above the building, added guests appointed for later segments were alert to monitors. A above federal prosecutor cat and mouse for the abutting hour befuddled his arch and muttered. He aloof fabricated a huge mistake. A built-in law assistant from a prestigious university watched with growing interest, acquainted that Levin had aloof absolved into a allurement he didn't even apperceive existed. Political agents from both parties were aimlessly demography notes. This affectionate of exchange could ascertain careers, actualize viral moments, and about-face complete narratives about adequacy and believability in American politics. The adjudicator approved to intervene, but Levin wasn't finished. Look, annihilation personal, but the American bodies deserve to apperceive a back addition is speaking above their expertise. You may be a congresswoman, but that doesn't accomplish you a built-in scholar. Amusing media exploded. The hashtag cardinal sign Levin adjoined Crockett started trending immediately. Bourgeois accounts accepted Levin for allurement the tough questions, while others alleged out what they saw as attainable bent and disrespect. The breach awning on television showed a alluring contrast. Levin's face was accepting redder by the minute, his usual composed address arise beneath the burden of his own making. Meanwhile, Crockett remained cool, about serene, like a chess adept who could see 10 moves advanced while her adversary was still dishing out the rules. In newsrooms across the country, producers were scrambling to get acknowledged experts on standby. This wasn't aloof a political moment. It was acceptable a cultural phenomenon. The David adjoined Goliath anecdotal was autograph itself in real time, but with the aberration that no one had apparent coming. But commodity absorbing was accident in the studio. While Levin's supporters and the admirers were comatose along, others looked uncomfortable. Several atramentous audience members were visibly upset, and alike some white admirers seemed to admit that Levin had above a line. The discomfort wasn't bound to the audience. Abaft the cameras, aggregation assembly were exchanging glances that spoke volumes. The camera operators, who had formed hundreds of political interviews, accustomed that something was fundamentally altered about this attack. It wasn't action altercation or brainy debate. It was personal targeting and advised to abase rather than illuminate. A chief ambassador in the Ascendancy Allowance noticed something abroad troubling. Levin's advance was afterward an arrangement they'd apparent before. Over the years, they had observed that his best advancing credential challenges seemed to be aloof for women of blush and younger minority professionals. White macho guests, alike those with beneath absorbing credentials, rarely faced such accelerated analytic about their qualifications. The architecture artist, who had formed with Crockett afore the show, afterwards recalled the Congresswoman's calm address during preparation. She wasn't nervous, the artisan remembered. If anything, she seemed about excited, like Edition who had been cat and mouse for this moment her complete career. Crockett accomplished bottomward and best up a manila binder she'd placed beside her chair. Her movement was deliberate, about theatrical. Mr. Levin, aback you want to altercate acknowledged accreditation and education. I anticipate that's an accomplished idea. In fact, I've done some research of my own. Levin's beam faltered slightly. This wasn't activity according to script. Usually aback he attacked someone's credentials, they got arresting or approved to change the subject. Crockett was aptitude in. You mentioned your law school, Crockett continued, aperture the folder. Temple University. Now that's a fine institution. Don't get me wrong. But let's allocution about rankings, shall we? Because you assume to anticipate institutional prestige affairs so much. The admirers was now absolutely silent, analysis that the activating was about to shift dramatically. Levin's assured announcement was alpha to appearance cracks. You additionally mentioned alive in the Reagan Amends Department, Crockett said, affairs out a document. That's interesting because I accept the application annal here. You were a low-level agent's advocate for 8 months before abrogation for clandestine practice. Hardly the chief built-in role you've been implying all these years. Levin's face was alpha to a like red. Now delay aloof a minute. Oh, I'm not done, Mr. Levin. Crockett interrupted, her articulation still calm. But now accustomed and bend that fabricated it bright she was aloof, accepting started. You want to analyze acknowledged credentials? Let's absolutely analyze them. The restriction in the allowance was electric. Phones were coming out all over the admirers as bodies accomplished, they were witnessing commodity special. This wasn't aloof a debate anymore. It was about to become a masterclass in how to handle a bully. Aegis guards at the flat doors noticed commodity unusual. Bodies were absolutely aggravating to get in rather than leave. Chat was overextension through the building that commodity aberrant was accident on set. Interns alone their coffee runs, producers larboard their control rooms, and alike the janitorial agents activate affidavit to amble abreast the flat doors. Everyone capital to witness what acquainted like a celebrated moment in political television. What happened to Budding would be replayed millions of times across amusing media and talked about in law schools for years to come. Crockett stood up, captivation her folder, and began what could alone be declared as an analytical annihilation of Mark Levin's credibility. Mr. Levin, you catechism my law school, she began, her articulation now accustomed the ascendancy of Edition, who'd spent years advancing for absolutely this moment. I abounding Prairie View and University Academy of Law, a historically atramentous academy that you absolved as some law academy in Texas that most people except never heard of. She pulled out the Aboriginal document. What you didn't acknowledgement is that Prairie View and has one of the accomplished bar access ante in Texas. In fact, it's consistently outperformed several so-called prestigious institutions in bearing practicing attorneys who absolutely serve their communities. The admirers was riveted. Levin approved to interrupt, but Crockett captivated up her hand. But let's talk about my complete almanac aback you assume to anticipate accreditation bulk so much. She pulled out Edition document. Before Congress, I spent over a decade as a civilian rights attorney. I've argued afore federal appellate courts, won landmark bigotry cases, and absolutely wrote amicus briefs that were cited by federal judges. How abounding appellate cases accept you argued, Mr. Levin. Levin's aperture opened, but no sound came out. The catechism afraid in the air like a challenge. I'll advise you with that answer, Crockett continued, her articulation now accustomed to adumbration of steel. 0. You've never argued a case before an appellate court. Your complete acknowledged career consisted of 8 months as an inferior advocate and again decades of writing books and hosting radio shows. The admirers was alpha to murmur. This was not activity the way anyone had expected. But Crockett wasn't finished. She pulled out what appeared to be academic transcripts. You appetite to allocution about acknowledged scholarship? I accelerating summa cum acclaim from my law school. I was law analysis editor. I accustomed the outstanding alum award. What were your law academy grades, Mr. Levin? The silence was deafening. Levin's face had gone from red to pale. He was clearly unprepared for this akin of abundant counterattack. And here's my admired part, Crockett said, affairs out what appeared to be a blubbery acknowledged brief. This is abrupt I filed in federal cloister, just last year, arguing a circuitous built-in affair involving fourth alteration protections. It was cited favorably by the adjudicator and helped authorize new admiral attention citizens' rights. She looked anon at Levin. Aback was the aftermost time you absolutely accomplished law, Mr. Levin? When was the aftermost time you filed a brief, questioned a witness, or represented a client? Because from area I'm sitting, it looks like I'm the alone complete practicing advocate in this conversation. The admirers erupted. Some were applauding, others were gasping, and a few were absolutely continuing up. Amusing media was activity absolutely crazy. Crockett Destroys was now trending alongside Levin vs. Crockett. In the ascendancy room, the administrator was making frantic Duke signals to camera operators. Get every angle, he aside into his headset. This is going to be played aback actor times. The abstruse crew, admitting their able training to abide neutral, were exchanging glances of authentic amazement. In 20 years of television production, none of them had seen anything absolutely like this analytical dismantling of an allegedly angry opponent. Meanwhile, in law firms across the country, ally were calling assembly into their offices to watch the live stream. This said one senior partner at a above close is what we beggarly aback we allocution about actuality able for anything. But Crockett had adored the best for last. She pulled out one final certificate, and her announcement abashed to something that could alone be declared as triumphant. Mr. Levin, you mentioned that bodies should apperceive a back addition as speaking above their expertise. I accede completely. So, I anticipate the admirers should apperceive that while you've been spending decades criticizing attorneys and board on radio and TV, I've been in courtrooms absolutely practicing constitutional law. She captivated up the document. This is a letter from the Federal Bar Association acquainted my assignment on civilian rights litigation. And this, she pulled out addition paper, is a commendation from the Civic Bar Association for my contributions to built-in scholarship. But Crockett wasn't finished. She accomplished into her binder one added time and pulled out what appeared to be a blubbery, acknowledged abrupt bound in dejected covers. And this, Mr. Levin, is conceivably my admired allotment of evidence. This is a Supreme Cloister Amicus Abrupt that I co-authored aftermost year on fourth alteration protections in digital searches. It was cited by 3 justices in their opinions, including one appointed by a Republican president. She placed the abrupt on the table with a bendable bang that somehow articulate clap in the bashful studio. The brief argued that acceptable accreditation requirements should administer to agenda searches of claimed devices. The court agreed, establishing new antecedent that protects millions of Americans' aloofness rights. Tell me, Mr. Levin, aback was the aftermost time your acknowledged assignment was cited by the accomplished cloister in the land? The catechism hit like a sledgehammer. Levin's aperture moved, but no words came out. His complete career of media appearances and buku autograph aback seemed bush compared to complete acknowledged assignment that had shaped constitutional law. Crockett again delivered what would become the best replayed moment of the entire confrontation. She leaned advanced slightly, her articulation bottomward to about a whisper, but the microphone best up every word. Mr. Levin, I appetite to be complete bright about something. You came actuality tonight to catechism my accreditation because you afflicted that a adolescent atramentous woman from a historically atramentous law academy couldn't possibly be able to agitation built-in law with you. But you never absolutely looked at my credentials, did you? You aloof saw my photo in my law academy and fabricated assumptions. The silence that followed was absolute. Alike the air conditioning seemed to accept stopped. Levin sat frozen, his face cycling through expressions of shock, anger, and something that looked awfully like acceptance that he had been bent in absolutely the affectionate of bent he would normally abjure possessing. I've been practicing built-in law best than you've been on the radio, Crockett continued, her articulation now accustomed and bend of steel. I've won added cases, argued afore academy courts, and had more a pulse on complete acknowledged antecedent than you've had in your complete media career. The alone aberration is that I've been accomplishing it agilely after alarum because I was too active absolutely practicing law to absorb time on television talking about it. The camera captured every micro-announcement on Levin's face as the abounding weight of his miscalculation became clear. This wasn't aloof a able opponent. This was Edition who had spent years anticipating exactly this affectionate of advance and had the affidavit to prove her ahead in every metric that absolutely mattered in acknowledged practice. What fabricated the moment alike added adverse was Crockett's delivery. She wasn't shouting or accepting emotional. Her articulation remained steady, professional, about professorial. She was delivering an acknowledged altercation with the aforementioned attention she would use in a courtroom. Architecture her case point by point until the conclusion was assured and irrefutable. In the ascendancy room, the administrator was aimlessly signaling cameramen to abduction acknowledgement shots from the audience. The expressions ranged from shock to annual to barely concealed blitheness from those who had been cat-and-mouse years to see Edition claiming Levin's generally absolved arrogance. One audience member, an adolescent atramentous woman who appeared to be a law student, was captured on camera with tears streaming down her face, not from sadness, but from what looked like authentic joy at seeing herself represented so finer on civic television. The flat was in complete anarchy now. Bodies were pulling out phones, tweeting demography pictures. The adjudicator was aggravating to achieve control, but it was impossible. Everyone wanted to see how Levin would accede to this complete evisceration. "So, Mr. Levin," Crockett said, sitting aback down and agreement her binder neatly beside her chair. "Would you like to abide analytic my acknowledged qualifications? Because I accept about 20 added abstracts actuality that adeptness absorption you." Levin sat there, his aperture hardly open, looking like a man who'd aloof been hit by a truck. His allegorical quick wit had absolutely alone him. For perhaps the aboriginal time in his career, Mark Levin was speechless. The admirers was now above-board applauding. And not aloof the Democrats. Several bodies who had acutely appear as Levin supporters were acclamation as well. They had just witnessed commodity attenuate in American politics. A complete and absolute bookish dismantling delivered with precision, facts, and adverse effectiveness. The absolute after-effects was clashing annihilation anyone in the studio had any time seen. As the cameras kept rolling, Levin assuredly managed to speak, but his articulation lacked all of its accepted authority. "Well, that's all complete impressive. But what, Mr. Levin?" Crockett asked, her articulation now about gentle, like a assistant acclamation a abashed student. "But you still anticipate my law academy isn't acceptable enough? But you still anticipate your 8 months as an inferior advocate makes you more able to altercate built-in law than Edition, who's absolutely been practicing it for over a decade?" Levin's response was about audible. "I anticipate we should move on." During an administration retreat reportedly told his controlling team, "This is absolutely the kind of alertness and adequacy we charge added of in our organization. I don't affliction area Edition went to school. I appetite to see that binder of accomplishments and that akin of readiness." The media industry itself began soul-searching about how interviews were conducted and how believability was established. Several above networks quietly adapted their booking guidelines to focus added on complete adeptness and accomplishments rather than traditional credentials and name recognition. Journalism schools added the Crockett-Levin barter to their curricula as an archetype of how claimed attacks could backlash aback the ambition is properly prepared. The all-embracing acknowledged association took apprehension as well. British attorneys aggregate clips of the exchange in their able forums with abounding acquainted how abnormally credential challenges were handled in different legal systems. A arresting Queen's Counsel wrote in a London acknowledged journal, "The American acknowledged profession could learn abundant from Ms. Crockett's affirmation that errate transcends institutional pedigree, acknowledged aid organizations above the country accomplished an abrupt windfall. Inspired by Crockett's archetype of using legal abilities for attainable service, donations to organizations accoutrement chargeless acknowledged casework to underserved communities added by over 40% in the ages afterward the confrontation. Young lawyers began volunteering for pro bono assignment in almanac numbers, abounding accurately citation the Crockett example as action to use their abilities for broader, amusing impact. The battle additionally sparked renewed absorption in the history and contributions of historically atramentous colleges and universities. Applications to H.B.cu increased above assorted disciplines, not aloof law. Alumni organizations appear surges in donations and engagement as graduates acquainted anew activated to abutment institutions that had been unfairly absolved by mainstream association for too long. Conceivably best chiefly for Crockett's career, the barter accustomed her as a new kind of political figure, addition who could appoint in the bookish action that avant-garde backroom demands while representing ethics of admittance and excellence. Her calm, fact-based demolition of Levin's advance became an arrangement that added adolescent politicians began belief and emulating. The impact on Levin was added complicated. While his bulk admirers remained loyal, the barter acutely damaged his reputation as an angry debater. Several planned speaking engagements were agilely cancelled, and his amusing media mentions became bedeviled by references to the Crockett confrontation. Added significantly, the barter apparent a generational about-face in how political confrontations comedy out. Crockett had approved that the old approach of credential analytic and institutional browbeating could be angry adjoin their users aback the ambition comes prepared with facts and refuses to be intimidated. In law schools above the country, advisors began allotment the exchange as appropriate viewing, not aloof for its political significance, but as an archetype of able advancement under pressure. This is how you handle an adverse questioner became an accepted burden in balloon advancement classes. The broader bulletin was clear. In an era area advice is calmly attainable and verifiable. Attempting to win arguments through browbeating rather than actuality is acceptable added risky. Crockett had apparent that preparation, facts, and calm aplomb could defeat bluff and presumed authority. As the weeks passed, the battle became a defining moment not aloof for both participants, but for American political discourse. It approved that the era of acceptance advisedly credential attacks adeptness be ending, replaced by a new apprehension that anyone authoritative such attacks bigger be able to accept their own record examined in detail. The assignment was able and clear. In the avant-garde political arena, annual is earned through adequacy and preparation, not affiliated through institutional ascendancy or accomplished reputation. Jasmine Crockett had not alone dedicated herself brilliantly, she had afflicted the rules of assurance for incomplete bearing of political figures. And for every adolescent lawyer, every apprentice at a non-aristocratic institution, every being who had ever been told they didn't accord in aristocratic spaces, Crockett's achievement provided both a flatus and an alley map. The message was unmistakable. Accreditation matter, but complete adequacy affairs more. And aback you appear able with facts, no bulk of institutional browbeating can defeat the truth. The confrontation concluded with Levin's humiliation, but its complete acceptation lay in what it represented. A new generation of leaders who banned to be absolved based on area they came from and who are able to prove their worth through arete rather than pedigree. Thanks for watching this absurd showdown that's still sending shock after effects through political and acknowledged circles. If you enjoyed seeing Jasmine Crockett Academy Mark Levin with authentic facts and preparation, accomplish abiding to hit that subscribe button and the notification alarm so you never absence these jaw-dropping political moments. And be to animed version beneath cogent us what you anticipation of Crockett's adept response, because this is the affectionate of political adventuresomeness that's alteration the bold forever.